The sun has been up for 4 hours. The temperature is already 41 degrees. And the men from the most famous special operations force in the world are, for the first time in their careers, genuinely unsure whether they are going to make it through the day. They are not in a combat zone. They are in the Negev Desert in southern Israel. The scenario is a training exercise. The people running it are their allies. And the specific quality of difficulty they are encountering is something that no amount of SEAL training had specifically prepared them for. But to understand why a unit with the reputation and the resources of the United States Navy SEALs found themselves at a threshold they had not expected to reach, you need to go back 3 weeks, to a briefing room in Virginia, to the moment someone first suggested putting them through the exercise that Israeli desert units run as their standard selection qualifier, and to the response that suggestion received from the SEAL commander in the room. He said yes immediately. He had 12 days to regret it. The United States Navy SEALs, sea, air, and land teams, are among the most recognizable special operations forces in the world, not simply because of their operational record, which is extensive and classified in its most significant details, but because the culture around them has become part of the American military identity in a way that few units achieve. The selection process, basic underwater demolition and SEAL training, known as BUD/S, has a first-phase attrition rate that typically sits between 70 and 80%. The training that follows selection produces operators who are, by any measurable standard, exceptional across multiple physical and tactical domains: water operations, combat diving, parachute insertion, close quarters battle. The SEAL is designed to be capable across all of them at a level that most military personnel cannot approach. By the time a SEAL operator reaches a unit that would participate in this exercise, he has been training and operating for a minimum of 4 to 5 years. He has been told, and has earned the right to believe, that he is among the best prepared soldiers on earth. Before we go further, if this is the kind of story you come here for, subscribe to Deep Insight right now and turn on notifications. Every week there is another one. Now back to the Negev, and the question that nobody in that SEAL unit thought to ask before they got on the plane. What does it mean to be the best prepared soldier in an environment that was not designed around your preparation? The Israeli desert units that designed and ran this exercise do not have the same global recognition as the SEALs. This is partly by design. Israeli special operations culture has a different relationship with visibility than American military culture. The units that operate in the Negev and the surrounding desert environments have been training in that specific terrain for decades through conflicts that made the desert not a training environment but a survival environment. The exercise they run, the one the SEALs were about to attempt, is called Core. It translates roughly as furnace. It is not the most demanding exercise in the Israeli special operations inventory. It is the baseline, the entry-level qualifier that filters the candidates who cannot function in the specific environment from the candidates who can. It runs for 72 hours. Continuous movement. No shade. Minimal water. Calculated to the clinical minimum required to prevent medical emergency without providing comfort. A load of 28 kilograms on every operator's back. Navigation challenges that require continuous problem-solving under heat stress. And a pace set not by the slowest man, but by the man at the front, who knows the terrain and does not adjust for visitors. The Israeli commander who would run the exercise received the SEAL unit's profile 3 days before they arrived. He read it carefully. He made one change to the standard exercise design. He added 6 kilometers to the final day's route. The joint exercise had been arranged through the NATO Special Operations Liaison Framework, one of the mechanisms through which Allied units share training methodologies and assess interoperability. The SEALs had participated in joint exercises with Israeli units before, primarily in maritime and urban environments where the American equipment advantage was relevant. The Negev exercise was different. It was proposed by the Israeli side as an opportunity to expose the American unit to a training philosophy that the Israelis believed was underrepresented in Western special operations programs. The philosophy was simple. An operator who cannot function in extreme heat with minimal resources is an operator with a specific, exploitable limitation. The SEAL commander received the briefing on the exercise parameters. 41 degrees average daytime temperature, 72 hours, 28 kilograms, navigation intensive, no support infrastructure. He asked one question: whether the Israelis ran this exercise with their own selection candidates or with their operational operators. The answer was both. It was not considered differently demanding for experienced operators than for candidates. The terrain was the terrain. The heat was the heat. The load was the load. The SEAL commander nodded and confirmed participation. The 14 operators he selected for the exercise began their preparation 3 weeks out. They trained hard. They researched the environment. They arrived in Israel fit, rested, and professionally confident. What happened in the first 6 hours set the terms for everything that followed. The exercise began at 0500, not at dawn, at 0500 in the dark, because the Israeli commander wanted the first 3 hours to be completed before the full heat arrived. The route for day 1 covered 31 kilometers. The terrain was flat, rocky, and entirely without shade for 24 of those kilometers. The SEALs moved well in the early hours. Their fitness was exceptional. Their load management was disciplined. Their communication was clean. The Israeli operators who moved alongside them as guides and observers said nothing and matched the pace without visible effort. By hour 3, the sun was fully up. By hour 4, the temperature had reached 38 degrees. By hour 5, it was 40. The SEALs were drinking their water on the Israeli prescribed schedule, 300 milliliters every 40 minutes, not more. This was not what they were used to. The standard American hydration protocol for a movement of this intensity in this heat would have been significantly higher. The science behind the Israeli protocol was specific. Higher water intake in extreme dry heat produces a perspiration response that accelerates fluid loss rather than preventing it. The Israeli schedule had been calibrated through 40 years of operational desert experience to the precise level that maintained function without triggering the sweating cascade. The SEALs did not know this yet. They knew only that they were thirsty in a way that their training had not produced before. By hour 6, 2 of the 14 had fallen 5 meters behind the pace. That was the first number the Israeli commander noted on his clipboard. Hour 12 was where the exercise began to separate. The SEALs had been moving for 12 continuous hours. The distance covered was 42 kilometers. The temperature had peaked at 43 degrees in the early afternoon and had dropped to 31 as darkness arrived. The load had not changed. The Israeli operators were moving at the same pace. Their expressions had not changed. Their communication was still minimal. One of the Israeli guides stopped at the 12-hour mark and pointed at the ground, the position where they would rest for 90 minutes before the night navigation phase began. 90 minutes. The SEALs sat down. 2 of them lay flat immediately. 3 were dealing with blisters that the Israeli desert terrain had produced in a specific way that their footwear was not optimized for. The heat blisters formed differently on the rocky Negev surface than on the sand-based terrain the SEALs had trained on. Deeper, more painful under load. The Israeli operators sat in a group and ate in near silence. None of them lay down. The Israeli commander walked among both groups, making notes. At the 13-and-a-half-hour mark, he called the night navigation briefing. The route for the next 6 hours covered 22 kilometers. It used terrain features that did not appear on the map, dry riverbeds, rock formations, as the primary navigation reference points. The map was accurate. The features just required a specific knowledge of how the desert reads at night to interpret correctly. One SEAL navigator asked for clarification on 2 of the reference points. The Israeli commander answered both questions in 7 words. They had 4 hours to begin. What the Israeli operators did during the night navigation phase was a thing that the SEALs would discuss for the longest afterwards. Not because it was dramatic, because it was so completely the opposite of what the Americans expected from operators moving through hostile terrain at night. They were quiet, not tactically quiet, that the SEALs understood and matched. They were quiet in a different way. The kind of quiet that comes from not spending energy on anything that does not directly contribute to movement. No commentary on the terrain. No acknowledgement of discomfort. No unnecessary readjustment of equipment. The Israeli operators moved through the dark desert like people who had done this so many times that it had stopped producing any internal event worth expressing. The SEALs matched the pace. They navigated accurately. Their technical performance during the night phase was, by any standard measure, excellent. But there was a quality to the Israeli movement that the SEAL commander, watching from a support vehicle he was not supposed to use but was using, could not immediately name. He described it later as a different relationship with time. The Israeli operators were not counting the hours until the exercise ended. They were not managing the gap between where they were and where they needed to be. They were simply in the terrain, doing the thing, with no apparent horizon to work toward. One SEAL asked an Israeli operator, during a brief hold at a navigation checkpoint, how far they had left. The Israeli Day 2 was where the SEALs made their adjustment. And what the adjustment was, and how quickly it happened, is the part of the story that the Israeli commander included in his formal assessment. The SEALs are not people who struggle without responding. That is what the selection process is designed to ensure. The question is not whether they will adapt. It is how they will adapt and what the adaptation costs. By the morning of Day 2, the 14 operators had collectively recalibrated. The 2 who had fallen behind on Day 1 were back in position. The blisters were dressed and managed. The hydration rhythm was internalized, and the particular quality of sustained movement that the Israelis demonstrated, the removal of the internal horizon, had been observed carefully enough to be partially replicated. Partially, not fully, because the Israeli operators had not learned that quality. They had been produced by an environment that made it necessary. The SEALs were adopting it as a technique. The Israelis carried it as a fact. The difference was visible in the way each group looked at the terrain. The Israeli operators scanned it with the flat attention of people reading something familiar. The SEALs scanned it with the heightened alertness of people managing something difficult. Both were moving at the same pace. Both were hitting their navigation marks. Both were carrying the same load. And then the Israeli commander did something at the start of Day 2's morning phase that nobody in the SEAL unit was expecting. He stood at the front of the combined group and looked at the route ahead. The final phase of core, the 24-hour closing movement, is designed to be the exercise's hardest component, not because the terrain changes, because the accumulated fatigue of the preceding 48 hours converts every kilometer into something that arithmetic cannot fully describe. By hour 48, both groups had covered 109 kilometers. The SEALs had lost no one. All 14 were still moving, still in position, still functional. The Israeli commander had noted this. He had also noted the specific way the SEALs had reorganized their group structure on Day 2, distributing the strongest operators into positions that supported the ones carrying more fatigue. It was instinctive team management. The Israelis did not do this. Each Israeli operator was expected to manage his own margin. The collective organization the SEALs demonstrated was a different doctrine, not a weakness. The final phase route was 37 kilometers. The exercise was repeated 18 months later, with a different SEAL element and a modified Israeli unit. The Israeli commander made 2 changes to the design based on his after-action report. He increased the team-based navigation elements and reduced the individual self-management checkpoints. The SEAL unit made 1 change to their preparation. They trained for 6 weeks in the Mojave Desert before arriving. The second exercise produced a different result from the first. Not dramatically different. The desert is a desert, and the heat is a heat, and no amount of preparation makes 72 hours of it routine. But the gap between the 2 units in hour 12's movement quality was smaller. The 4-minute per 10 kilometer pace differential in the final phase was gone. What was not gone, what both commanders noted in their separate assessments, was a cultural difference in the relationship with discomfort. The Israeli operators did not experience the exercise as difficult in the same way the SEALs experienced it as difficult, not because they were less effective physically, but because the effective relationship between the physical state and the decision-making had been conditioned differently. The Israeli commander described it as a different question. The SEAL asks, how much further? The Israeli does not ask. He moves. Neither is wrong. They are different products of different necessities. The desert does not care which philosophy you hold, but it responds differently to each. The 3 SEALs who returned for the full Israeli desert training program completed it. 2 of them finished in the top third of their cohort. 2 elite units, 1 desert, 72 hours, and a result that changed how both sides train. The SEALs went in as the best prepared operators in the world for the environments their doctrine was built around. They came out with a specific gap identified and a specific respect earned. The Israelis went in expecting to demonstrate something about their environment. They came out with a question about their own doctrine they had not brought with them. That is what elite training does at its best. It shows you what you do not know yet. Deep insight covers the exercises, the operations, and the decisions that change how the best units in the world do what they do. If this one gave you something, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Hit like so more people find this story. And drop a comment with your answer to this. Between individual self-sufficiency and instinctive team support, which quality do you think produces the better operator under extreme stress?